Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And it's lovely for us to join you for this online webinar through the Tuberous Sclerosis Association. We're going to talk about the TANDem project. And Anne and I had a conversation about what we would do. And we've very recently had to give an update of our work over the last 12 months in an annual report to our funders. And so we thought, let's come and talk to all of you and tell you a bit about what we've been up to in the TANDem project over the last 12 months. So what we decided to do is, rather than just me or Anne present, is we're going to do a whole team presentation. So first I will start as the principal investigator of the project. Then I'll hand over to Anne, who's the co-PI from Brussels. She'll hand over to Tosca Heunis, who's our project coordinator, based also at Vrije Universiteit in Brussels. And then Stephanie Vanclooster, our postdoctoral researcher, will also present. And I'll then just wrap things up at the end. So the full title of our project is called Empowering Families Through Technology, a mobile health project to reduce the TAND identification and treatment gap. So that's quite a mouthful. So TANDem in short. And just to make sure everyone's on the same page, hopefully you're all familiar with the concept of TAND. It stands for TSC-associated neuropsychiatric disorders. And the important thing is that TAND is this umbrella term for all the possible mental health and developmental and neuropsychological and psychosocial issues that we may see in people with TSC. And we know most people with TSC will have some of these challenges. And we created this thing called the TAND checklist some years ago to help people screen for and identify all these multiple TAND manifestations. And you'll remember Lauren Leclésio, who did a lot of the early work in developing the TAND checklist and in validation of the TAND checklist. And when Lauren had developed the checklist and we went to the TSC international community, and here you can see a lovely picture of many familiar faces, people said the TAND checklist is very helpful, but it's still quite overwhelming when we think about all the different possible TAND manifestations that people might have. Can you do something to simplify things a bit for all of us? And so Lauren went away and in her PhD searched for, and that was the reason why she looked for natural clusters. So that's kind of natural groupings of TAND manifestations, because that would simplify the way we can then approach assessment and intervention to narrow that TAND identification and treatment gap. And when she took her findings back to the TSC community, people said, that's great, but we would really love to have something that we can complete ourselves and that's more quantified, so it can give us a sense of how badly things are at the moment. Then people said, can you also use technology, maybe an app of some sort, that we can put this information in? And also, we don't just want to be able to identify our challenges, we also want tips and information about what we can do to treat or to improve these challenges. And those really are the reasons and the aims of the TANDem project as we have created for today. So the first goal is to develop and validate a quantified self-complete checklist that's designed as a smartphone app. Number two, to generate consensus clinical guidelines, because we know at the moment there are no actual guidelines for treatment of TAND, and then to build those guidelines into, or the information and tips into the app. And thirdly, our goal is to develop a global TAND consortium of people interested in TAND research and in implementing TAND guidelines throughout the world. We were therefore delighted when the King Bodewijn Foundation gave us funding for this grant, and we also got, as many of you might know, co-funding from the Tuberous Sclerosis Association, hosting today's webinar to support particularly the technology development piece of our project. And I'm now going to hand over to Anne Jansen, who will tell you about, here on this picture you can see the kind of overall project plan. Anne will tell you about the multi-stakeholder launch meeting we had, and we'll tell you a little bit more about who's in the consortium and how we have structured the consortium. She will then hand over to Tosca, who will tell you about aim one, which is about the app development and the technology piece and the new questionnaire. And then Stephanie will talk a bit more about the actual development of consensus guidelines for identification and treatment. So with that, Anne, I'll hand over to you.
Good, thank you, and welcome from my side. So the TANDem project was officially launched last year in November 2019, that was. And as you can see, this was at a time when we had not yet heard of COVID or Corona. And so the whole consortium came together and joined at a beautiful beguinage in Leuven, Belgium. And this was really a very inspiring meeting. It was really a cross-fertilization between people from different fields, established TSC researchers, young TSC clinicians, family representatives from different parts of the world, and also, and it was very energizing, people that came from different fields, which I will highlight in a minute. So during this meeting, we really discussed the project aims and the team structure and the timelines, responsibilities, and this all really emerged in a very organic and interactive way. So then I can ask to move to the next slide. So the next slide illustrates the consortium and where people are coming from. And so it really brings together stakeholders from, as you can see, all different WHO regions and also from various backgrounds. And for us, very importantly, it mixes people with lived expertise and with professional expertise in TSC. And I maybe just want to ask Petrus to be my pointer and highlight our family representatives from Japan, from India, from Belgium, the UK, Canada, and also from the US. And I maybe just want to highlight also people that are new to the TSC field or to the TSC community, such as Sebastian Kucher from Buenos Aires in Argentina. He is an expert in autism research, as is Nola Chambers from Cape Town. And so also meeting with them, bringing their expertise into the TSC field has been very, very inspiring. And in addition, there were also very young researchers, for example, Stacey Bissell from the UK, who has interest in TSC and sleep and eating difficulties related to TSC. So I hope this just illustrates how the consortium came together and how it really is a very inspiring way of interacting with people from different backgrounds. And then I will show you the next slide, which is the organogram of our consortium. So Petrus and I are joined in the action group by Stephanie and Tosca, and in the steering group by Chris Kingswood, Shobha Srivastava from India, family representative, and also by Lisbeth de Waal from Leuven. And then we have a technology group, which is spearheaded by Tosca and is in close interaction with our technology partner, IT Hands. Tosca will tell you more about that. Then we have 8 cluster groups, which each have a cluster lead and a co-lead, and they meet on a regular basis, and that's Stephanie's responsibility. Then there are 3 validation sites, one in Boston Children's Hospital, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and then also the team from the TS Alliance Natural History Database. They also joined for the validation work. And then we have an emerging researcher group, which is really to foster the next generation of TAND researchers to make sure that after this TANDem project, more research will be organized. And a dissemination group, which takes on responsibilities for the website, social media, and other capacity building activities. And then last but not least, very important, the family representative group. And they really serve as a sounding board just to make sure that everything that we put in place and the way we progress in our work in the TANDem consortium, that this really is aligned with what the TSC community truly needs. And with that, I will hand over to Tosca. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I've just included a few of the screenshots of the app currently under development. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 phases of app development that we're working on and the different functionality that the app will have once completed. So in phase 1, app users will be able to register a user profile. They'll be able to capture information either about themselves as an individual with TSC or about others with TSC whom they're caring for, or both. And this information they'll be able to capture under the My TSC Family section of the app. App users will then also be able to capture information about the TSC story of each TSC family member, such as the age when diagnosed with TSC and the first concerns leading to TSC diagnosis. After that, once they've completed the TSC story for each family member, the app user can proceed to complete a self-report quantified version of the TAND checklist. So this will allow the app user to quantify the TAND difficulties experienced so that they can not only see if someone is affected by TAND, but can also in a way measure how much someone is affected by TAND. Upon completion of the checklist, the app will generate a unique TAND cluster profile for each individual. And this will be displayed as a summary if you look at the screen on the right. Yes, thanks. And the app user will also be able to download and share a PDF summary of this TAND checklist and the cluster profile. You'll see there in the sidebar, if Prof. Vries, if you can refer to the second screenshot, you'll see there we have a sidebar, and those are indicating the different functionalities. Just to the left, My TSC family, My TSC story, My TAND checklist, My TAND clusters. Then you'll see we also have a functionality for My surveys. So to help us learn a little bit more about TAND, the app will also on occasion invite users to complete a mini survey once in a while. These may include questions about troubles with sleeping or anxiety or seizures, things like that as we go along. And so these items all fall, or this functionality all forms part of phase 1 of the app development. And once phase 1 is complete, we're going to proceed with data collection for the validation study. And as Stephanie will also discuss in a moment, while we're developing the consensus clinical guidelines, once the formulation of those have been finished, we're going to be building that into the app. So that will form phase 2 of app development. So the idea would then be that when the app user clicks on one of these clusters, illustrated on that screenshot there on the right, be directed to a new screen which shows you relevant clinical consensus guidelines. And I think I will stop there, and I'll hand over to Stephanie now to tell you a little bit more about the development of the consensus guidelines, M2 of the project.
Yes, so as you might remember from a previous slide, we have 7 natural TAND clusters, and in accordance with these TAND clusters, 8 cluster groups were created in the beginning of the project to lead this development of consensus guidelines for the assessment and treatment of TAND. Each cluster group has 1 lead, a co-lead, and 1 to 3 additional members, including at least 1 family representative. So a first task for these groups in the beginning of this year was to conduct a review of the scientific literature and to generate a first chapter draft with all the information they collected. These drafts were first reviewed internally by us, the action team, and then restructured by each group into a uniform format. Then these drafts were also reviewed externally by members from the consortium. These were 2 or more reviewers, and also all members were given the opportunity to provide feedback on each draft. A second task was then for the groups to write summary statements and recommendations based on the literature they had been collecting, on which each group first had to reach internal consensus. And then the next step, which has just taken place prior to this conference, was to reach consensus on these statements and recommendations by all members of the consortium. So how was this consensus exercise done? How did we reach external consensus? Well, first, all consortium members had to rate each statement and recommendation per cluster using a Likert scale, and they also had to rank their top 3 recommendations per cluster. Based on these results, we were then able to identify those items for which consensus has already been reached, but also those items for which further clarification and direct discussions were needed. And so this final round of discussions and ranking has just taken place. So from now on, we can start with setting up a final list of consensus items that will be used to develop the TAND toolkit for the app. So to summarize, we have 8 cluster groups that have written chapters with evidence-based statements and recommendations on TAND. That will be the basis for the generation of the clinical guidelines that will be built into the TAND Toolkit app. And these chapters will also be, in addition to this, used as individual chapters in a TAND book that will be written for families and practitioners, and also for a manuscript on consensus clinical guidelines on TAND that will be in turn published in a peer-reviewed journal. So I think that's it on my part. Thank you.
Now I need to remember to unmute myself. Thank you, Anne, Tosca, and Stephanie. Really just a brief summary then of our next steps. You've just heard Stephanie talk about the virtual consensus conference. Our original plan was to have an in-person conference just before the TSC conference in London, but of course COVID put a stop to that. And maybe in the interest of time, maybe we can discuss more about that in the Q&A after the overall presentation. What we then need to do, as you've heard, is we're going to draft a manuscript for a peer-reviewed publication. We're going to work on the TAND Toolkit that will be built into the app. We will finalize the actual app because of all the technology work that you've heard Tosca talk about. And then probably the main task for 2021 for the year 2 of the project will be to do the validation. And by that we mean we need to make sure that when people with TSC families complete the TAND SQ, that it maps onto, that it captures all the things that are important, that it's clear, that it's understandable, that the technology works, but also that in comparison to expert data, it captures the things that are important, so that when people in the future use the tool online, wherever they are in the world, we know that it's an accurate measure of the kinds of concerns that families might have. Our other exciting plan for 2021 is we want to have a consortium meeting. And once again, we're very optimistic by nature. We're really hoping that we can have an in-person meeting somewhere in Europe or in the UK. We'll have to keep you posted on that one. But part of the purpose of such consortium meetings is really in part to plan what else we need to do. Also, you remember that aim 3, which is about building a network of people, helping support early career researchers, connecting with people in the community. And those things are much more interesting and powerful when we can do them in person. So I think we're really keen that we can move away from our Zoom faces that we've all seen over the last number of months. The one incredible advantage we've had with this project is because it was set up as a technology project from the outset, we knew that we would do most of our work via Zoom. And so COVID-19 hasn't actually affected our progress in any major sense over the last year, which has been very fortunate. But we certainly hope that we can come back to a real life face-to-face meeting with people. And I think this is a chance for me to wrap up and say, number one, thank you to all the amazing contributions we've had from our consortium members. And if I show you this slide, just giving you an indication of all the multiple participants from all over the world, a range of institutions and organizations. We're really fortunate and have had a really, really stimulating year, as Anna said when we started, working with everyone in the team. And we certainly hope that all of you listening who are not currently in the TANDem project will be enthusiastic. And the more we find out, the more we want to share with all of you as well. And so I think with that, I will stop with our beautiful logo that I hope all of you love and say thank you on behalf of the whole TANDem Consortium for your participation. And we look forward to talking to you more in the question and answer session. Thank you.